Well, I know we're gonna have a star-filled episode today. I hit record, but now we're actually gonna really start. We probably should have hit record a few minutes before that and got the whole AI conversation because that was really interesting as well. Um, but for everyone new to the podcast, we are on episode 15 of the Conquer the Mind podcast. We got an industry veteran today with Ron Bender. Been in franchising for over 25 years at this point. Now that we're on the 15th episode, we're going to change things up a little bit. So Ron, first off, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited to dive in, and I wish we had more than an hour. I feel like there's a lot I got to pick your brain apart with today.
Thank you very much, Josh. I love first of all, I love working with you, and secondly, I love the franchise community. This is this we call it an industry or a business model. It just gives me so much satisfaction. I just dearly love what I do, so I'm thrilled to speak to your listeners.
Awesome, Ron. And I appreciate that. And, I really appreciate our relationship as well. You're one of the most responsive people, if not the most responsive person in franchising. Doesn't matter if it's after 9 to 5 or on the weekends. That's what really shows a lot to me about Ron. It's not a 9 to 5 job. It's really a lifestyle and something he's passionate about. And it's really about giving to other people at this point. So I'm really excited today. We're going to do a lot kind of diving into the candidate process. Ron's done a couple podcasts at this point. He's already gone through his career, so you guys are welcome to go back. I'm going to save him the time of kind of going through his career, although I definitely would love to dive into it maybe if we get to the end. But Ron started off. I'm going to kind of dive in. And Ron, feel free to correct any gaps where I mess up. But I'm going to try to kind of quickly just dive through your 25-year career. And then we'll dive into it if that sounds okay. So Ron, about 25 years ago, started off in multi-unit retail management, and he was actually recruited by a retail franchisor that was kind of new to the space, Wireless Zone, which is known as Verizon Wireless today, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. But he got involved with them when they really didn't know anything about franchising, and Ron didn't really know a whole lot either. He was really just getting started, and he really learned everything about franchising at the ground level and had a tremendous amount of responsibility even at that early stage. And he literally brought Verizon Wireless from literally a few units to hundreds of units and really scaled a franchise. And in order to do so, we're going to learn about today, requires responsible growth, strong validation, happy franchise owners. So the ability to grow at such a strong rate and keep the validation so high is really powerful. And Ron really has been involved in all aspects of the franchise discovery process, the education process, dealing with candidates, brokers, relationships. And after Verizon Wireless, he's gone on at a couple number other franchises, including Big Frog Franchise Group, Alpha Graphics, and he's done very similar things where he's literally done the entire franchise discovery process for these franchises, from literally developing leads, finding qualified candidates, to getting them over the finish line, then continuing that support, that relationship, the operations, dealing with FDD documents, the financials. He has done it all. This is a really long-winded introduction because Ron has literally done everything in the industry, and he's very involved, very hands-on, worked at numerous franchises, all very successful today. So Ron, I'm very excited to dive in. How was that introduction? What did I miss? How do you feel about that?
I want to meet that guy. He sounds pretty amazing. I don't generally crow about myself. Although my wife would probably tell you that's a lie. No, that was impressive. Good job. I've learned a lot. Oh my gosh, and I'm still learning a lot.
Yeah.
This is not someone who knows everything willing to share it. This is someone who knows some willing to share it.
Yeah, and that's really big. As I was really reviewing a lot about you, you're very big on not only mentorship, but ongoing learning process, which I think is really powerful because I always say it's really bad to kind of put people into these two boxes, but it really comes down to, if you're trying to grow or if you're kind of comfortable with where you are and you're on that path of stability and, you're constantly growing, it doesn't matter what, and you're trying to help other people as well. So Today, Ron is the Vice President of Franchise Development, if you can't see, of Threshold Brands. So this is a highly curated collection of home service providers. So they focus on making the repair, maintenance, and enhancement easier so that you and your loved ones can focus on what you want to focus on. So they have over 300 franchise owners in over 500 locations. So Ron's been a significant part of that. So we're going to start off kind of diving in to really help candidates, people thinking about franchising, people maybe thinking about business ownership. So basically any process starts off with just the thought of it and thinking maybe I'm right for a business owner, maybe I'm not ready to be a business owner. Ron, when do you think is the time to start educating yourself, start doing some research, start looking things up? When do you think is kind of the right time for that?
If you're talking about learning about general small business, and I think that's you need to start that very, very early. And when my wife and I tried to teach our kids that if they wanted to work for themselves, that they needed to learn a lot so that they could then choose what business opportunity might be the best for them, which is not necessarily an easy task. That's quite different than saying, researching the actual franchise that you might want, which in most cases, that might be a 6-month or an 8-month maximum time frame. So, we don't suggest that people get into that looking at specific franchises a year and a half or 2 years before they might be ready to open a business. But definitely, as far as learning about small business, I think you should do that very, very early, as absolutely early as possible.
All right, that's perfect. And I like that point there where, even with kind of your son, your daughter, they don't know if they're going to buy a business tomorrow, but start to do the research, start to learn the small skills that you need so that you can eventually become a business owner, because there are so many different skills involved. So you kind of bring up a valuable point in terms of being a business owner. Obviously, you can try to do it yourself. You can try to be a franchise owner. Maybe you're someone in corporate America, maybe someone in retail like yourself. Maybe you haven't been a business owner in your past. Maybe you don't have family that have been business owners. How do you start to approach the process of, everyone wants to be their own boss, but how do you kind of decipher my own business, franchise owner? What's kind of the thought process there?
I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. When I first joined Wireless Zone back in the day,
Okay.
And to be wild, that was actually when it was Bell Atlantic Mobile. It was before Bell Atlantic Mobile and GTE and AirTouch got together and became Verizon. God, am I old? Anyway, that was back when phones was this big. Anyway, so the founder of Wireless Zone actually told me a story that I could use to help my candidates visualize that exact question. Am I right for a franchise ownership, or should I be an independent business owner? He said, if you like to swim, you have two choices. You can either get a membership in a swim club or a country club, or you can build your own pool. He said, going into a swim club is less expensive, and there's more people there. You can kind of party, there's less maintenance, all those great things. So it certainly costs you a lot less. And he meant going into a franchise, obviously. He said, but if you need to swim naked, or if you want to drain the pool and fill it with champagne, or if you want to swim, till 3 o'clock in the morning, you need to buy your own pool, build your own pool. And that's a kind of a visual thing. If you have to make every decision yourself, and if you know better than everybody, then you'd really better operate your own business and not try to conform to a franchise as far as their operating programs. But
Yeah.
a lot of people look at a franchise fee and they say, oh my gosh, why would I want to pay $50,000 to get into this business? I can start it without paying that money. But what you're buying is the blood and sweat and tears of all the people who came before you, who learned what didn't work and what does work. I mean, there's a lot of value there. So it all depends on, I guess, how much you can appreciate the value of that, and do you want to be able to follow the rules?
Yeah. No, I think it relates to the first thing you said with, if you're trying to evaluate franchise, business ownership, it just starts with doing the research, starting to develop these skills. And what you got to realize is, if you do want to be a business owner, these CEOs, these founders, they probably have if not years, probably decades of experience learning the ins and outs of the businesses, the challenges, what works. And at this point, they have the national relationships to get you the best resources, the best pricing, the best technology, which especially nowadays, before we were going over your AI background using Canva and AI. And, if your company isn't learning all these new AI techniques and technology, it's hard to be the best, let alone the best in sales, marketing, technology, having the best product. So I think, I could go on and on, but I think that's a really good point. So someone does decide, franchising, this is kind of a route I want to start to explore. They start doing some research. What are kind of the different steps that someone as a potential candidate could explore between going right to the franchise, meeting with a broker, maybe just doing independent internet research? Could you kind of walk someone through those different routes and maybe kind of the pros and cons of each that you've kind of seen over the industry?
Sure.
And don't be afraid to say bad things about brokers. I'm more than welcome if you want to rash on brokers too.
I appreciate that. I think the first and most important step, I think, in researching the idea of business ownership is there's a lot of introspection that you need. If you want to be a business owner, you need to look inside yourself. You need to consider what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are.
Mm.
And when I mentioned earlier that my wife and I had been, kind of coaching our own children, we have 3 kids, on the idea of potential business ownership. Well, 2 of the 3, the oldest and the youngest, are absolutely not interested in it.
Mm.
It's just not, it's not for them. It's not their personality. It's not their ambition. No problem.
Mm.
Not to say that either of them won't start a business that's more of a hobby business, which I think is much more likely with those 2. But our middle child, couldn't call him a child. He's 35 years old. He is very much a business guy. He's very much interested in operating his own business, and you have to be able to look deep inside. Say, what am I great at? Am I the sales guy? Am I the marketing guy? Am I the networking person? Do I understand the financials? And believe me, financials of small business is totally different than financials of big corporate. Not that it's harder, it's just different, and you need to be able to learn that, or the franchisor needs to provide you with the support in that area that you're a little weak in, or you need to hire the right person who does have the strengths that you aren't bringing to the table. So it's introspection, I think, is the first thing for any of those directions. And then when you're considering what type of a business to operate and how you should go about making that decision, you need to look at your market area that you want to operate in. Mm-hmm. What services or products are the competitive landscape is open to additional services. And I can tell you that when you look at different businesses, there are some communities that are not appropriate for those businesses. Mm-hmm. But sometimes people make the mistake when they're on their own and they're doing it alone. They say, well, there's no competitors here, I'm going to do great. Well, sometimes the reason that there's no competitors is that there's really not a good market. Mm-hmm. And of course, on the other hand, if they're looking at this investigating on their own, they'll say, well, there's a lot of competition here. Well, there may be a lot of competition, but that newest burger joint or pizza shop, and aren't there always a lot of new burger joints and pizza shop? They all do well. If their product is good, they do well for a certain time as well. So just because there's a good bit of competition doesn't mean that it's not an opportunity for you. Mm-hmm. But as far as looking at it yourself, you have a very minimal experience level as far as analyzing businesses. You can work with a business broker if you are one of those people who says, I have to have existing cash flow. I need a business that's already up and running so that I can leave my employment and know that I've got income coming in. Well, that's obviously going to be a lot more expensive for you, but a business broker is going to have some stable of business opportunities that you'll be able to look through.
Yeah.
Working with a franchise broker or consultant is a little bit of a different animal, and it's got good and bad, like all of these areas of opportunity. The good is that franchise brokers are trained to understand candidates and learn what their strengths are, what their personalities will be appropriate for, what they would have to hire for, or what the franchisor would have to provide to help make them successful. And they're also trained on different franchise opportunities, right? So they learn whatever their stable, their inventory of different franchises. The challenges of working with a franchise broker is that, first of all, brokers will have a limited number of franchises that are in their inventory that they are allowed to suggest. Usually it's a big enough number that that's really not a big drawback. But one of the challenges might be that they have some favorites, and they might want to pigeonhole every candidate into this square hole rather than the round hole that might be more appropriate.
Yeah.
And I know, Josh, you have the same situations that happen to you happen to me when I get candidates who are not working with a broker. They come to me and they say, well, tell me, what's the best franchise, right? That's the most common question I think I get. What's the best franchise? And there is no best franchise. And I would say the same thing to my son as I would to every candidate. Hopefully there might be a best franchise for you. And we can look into that. But there is no best franchise. There's no perfect franchise.
Yeah.
The other question that I get is, hey, how about Chick-fil-A? I like their sandwiches. Well, I love answering that question too, but I don't want to bore your listeners with that one. That's a rough one.
No, I get the same question too, and it's always a funny one. And yeah, I think that's just a really good point, all those things that you brought up. And it's interesting, as some candidates, they start doing the research, it can be pretty overwhelming. You kind of get a bunch of phone calls, a bunch of texts, you end up on 20 different automations. So it's overwhelming when you first get involved in trying to get over that mindset of getting even to that initial call. I think can be overwhelming for a lot of candidates. I don't know if that's anything you want to speak on.
Well, that's actually a pretty interesting topic. I know, we get what we as franchisors call organic leads. And that's when somebody comes home on a Friday night angry at their boss, and they go online and they search franchise opportunities or something, some business opportunity words, and they click on these clickbait websites, franchise portals or whatever they are. And then on Monday, they get inundated with calls. And I can tell you, having dealt with many, many of those inquiries over the years, my funniest one is I had somebody, this is back in the day before everybody had a cell phone, and I could tell this lady had picked up the phone, and as she was hanging it up, she said to someone with her, "Oh my gosh, it's one of them franchise," blowing up my phone, and hung up on me. And I just laughed because I knew she had clicked on one thing on a portal, and that information had gone out to 20 different franchisors who were all calling her on that Monday. So I think that happens a lot, and that is very, very overwhelming. That's why working with a franchise broker might allow you to narrow down your focus on things that might be more appropriate for your needs, your goals, your skill sets. And then you're only dealing with 3 or maybe 4 at the most, learning about them. And we have no problem. I got to tell you, we have no problem having a candidate go through our education process and then saying, you know what, this really just doesn't seem right for me. And then they go back to the broker and they say, hey, that was fun. I enjoyed it. It's not the right thing. So what else you got for me? That's great. That way, you're doing it in manageable chunks, right? Looking at 3. Okay, 2 of them fall out. I got this one that I like, but let's look at a couple more. That's a great way to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. One question I would have for you as a franchise developer, you get a bunch of different leads from various sources. When, Monday hits and, you're making the phone calls to the leads, are there any like specific leads that, you put a higher priority on, like people that, they're probably more serious in the process? Is like an organic lead better versus an internet lead versus a broker lead, or is there any kind of priority there that you look at?
Sure. And leads can come in from lots of different sources. The top source is a referral. So a referral coming in from an existing franchise owner would be absolutely the top of the heap. The next would be a referral from a franchise broker. We know that those folks in either of those 2 categories are at least somewhat educated about the business opportunity, and they are serious. And then anybody who came in as a, let's call it, organic lead through our website, they at least have learned enough about our specific business that they showed some interest in it. So that's the next level. And then the final layer is those we'll call them portal leads who clicked on, one thing and got sent to 20. Those are usually much, much tougher to reach because their interest is probably at a much earlier stage. Or, and this is one of my favorites, or when they came home on Friday night mad at their boss and clicked on all those franchise opportunities and then had a conversation with their significant other over the weekend, and that person said, oh, no, you are not leaving your job and getting a business. You better go back to work on Monday, in which case they're really not interested in answering my phone call and telling me, no, my significant other said no.
No, that's too funny, and that's a really good point. That's probably where a lot of leads come. It's really the Friday, Saturday nights at kind of strange hours. Maybe someone's had a couple cocktails. They're doing a couple, looking up some businesses, adding them to the cart, and that's kind of what happens on Monday. So let's say that scenario is kind of out of the picture. We have someone that is generally interested in the idea of franchising, being their own boss, taking control of their future. So whether they're filling out that lead, they're working with me and I introduce them to you, what does that first initial call look like? And I think for a lot of candidates, they're very eager to get the financials right away. They don't understand that it really is that two-way process. So what does the intro call look like, and what is kind of the point of the intro call?
Sure. I can tell you that, if I had my way, first of all, we send out a Calendly link in all of our text messages and emails so that a new candidate might get an introductory email and a text, and there's an e-brochure on the email and so forth, and then they can choose what time works for them, because I'd like to have a 15 or 20-minute conversation on that initial call, and I don't want to do it because they accidentally answered the phone. I want to do it when they've got the time to concentrate on it. So on that intro call, first of all, I want to learn a little bit about them. I want to know why they've decided to look into owning a business, and I want to know what their basic goals are, what their reason for being interested in their own business. And some people call that the dominant buying motive. Some people call it their motivation, whatever. I want to know. I want to be able to make sure that my business opportunity is going to give them the ability to attain whatever their goals are, right? And sometimes people come in with unrealistic goals. I'd like to let them know that up front so that it doesn't waste their or my time. They can go off and find, some unicorn that they're looking for. But then I also want to give them a general overview of the business. I want to tell them how and why the business works, and give them just enough information that they can decide if they want to learn more. Now, I'm an educator. I'm not really a sales guy. So my supervisors would certainly tell you that I talk too much. So would my wife. So would everybody who knows me. I know. But I like to give more information. And I am unusual in franchise developers in that I believe if someone asks me a question, I need to answer that question. Right? It's very rare that I will say, well, that's a little more operational than we're ready to get into. I mean, I will say that sometimes people really want to dig down into the weeds. They've got a little rabbit hole they want to go down. But if somebody says, well, what's it going to cost? I'm going to tell them what it's going to cost. If someone asks me, how many franchises do you have? How many people have multiple locations? How many trucks do they run, or whatever that question is? I know from my own ideas and research, I know if they're thinking that question and I won't answer it, they're not listening to the rest of the stuff I'm saying, because they're going, I wonder why he won't answer that. I really want to know that. Why won't he tell me that? And they're distracted. They're not paying attention. So I'm much more open generally with those kinds of questions than I think most people are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I like how you're an extrovert. You don't need to apologize for that. I think the viewers are going to love everything that you're saying today. I feel like I've already learned a lot. I can't believe it's already been 30 minutes. So looking at kind of that introduction call, it's really that two-way process. Candidates sometimes come in a little too eager to get, every question answered all at once, not necessarily understanding the discovery process, and you just kind of being that resource. And really the name of the podcast, Conquer the Minds, focused on the mindset. Can you walk someone through, you've done the discovery process, you've worked with a lot of successful franchise owners. and you've seen, probably a lot of bad introduction calls where maybe you're like, this probably isn't for you right away. What's
Right.
like a good mindset for a candidate to have on that introduction call? What should some things they should be thinking about in terms of, you're a franchise developer, you're an industry veteran, so it's very easy for someone like yourself to probably build that credibility on the call. But when someone's talking to a franchise developer, maybe like a newer brand, what are some of the things they should start to be looking for so that they can start to build some trust with that franchise developer?
Yeah, you're not asking any tough questions. Um, so
Hey, I
you
I
know,
like to get you to think a little bit on the podcast. I know you've done a
it's
couple podcasts now.
I have. I have. Yeah, I'm a podcaster apparently. Well, I think the first situation is that people need to have an open mind. I think a lot of people who are looking into a franchise or a business of any style, their first reason for thinking about that specific brand might be, oh, I love the product. And that's great. That's not a good reason to choose a business opportunity, right? Again, I'm a big fan of spicy chicken sandwiches at Chick-fil-A. I would absolutely never want to operate a Chick-fil-A for
Hmm.
many reasons. Not anything bad about Chick-fil-A. I'm not a food service guy. I don't want to do that. And much more. So just loving the product is not appropriate. Being open-minded, right? One of the things that we have is a maid service. Well, we don't want people who love to clean.
Hmm.
That's not the optimal candidate for a cleaning franchise or any franchise, as far as I know. We want somebody who can appreciate the value of that business model and can build a team, because that's a kind of a labor-intensive type of business. We want people open-minded. They can think about, okay, how would that fit into my lifestyle? Do I have the skill sets that work for this type of a business? And they need to ask questions. They need to find out what that business requires to be successful. And the franchise developer needs to be concise and confident and open, right?
Hmm.
Transparency is a key.
Yeah.
Um, I've done sales trainings, from my first career for just, multi-unit retail, as well as obviously through my franchising career. And one of the things that I tell people is that transparency is very apparent,
Hmm.
and just as transparent, just as visible is
Yeah.
non-transparency, right? If you are not open, that's going to haunt you. And I also tell people who ask me the tougher questions that the absolute worst thing that I could ever hear was a franchisee that I had brought into a system who then told me at some point in the future, if I had known that, I never would have done this. Oh
Hmm.
my gosh, I can't even tell
Yeah.
you how upset that would make me. But you have to be able to have a good rapport with a franchise developer. You have to be able to smile and nod when they're talking to you. Yes, okay, I understand that. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, and that's really it. It's a connection. It's a personal connection. Some salespeople of all types, and certainly franchise developers, they just want to spit information at you, and they're not asking you questions. They're not trying to get to know you. Well, how sincere is that person in trying to make sure that this is the right fit for that candidate? If they're not asking any questions whatsoever, that's kind of
Yeah.
hard to accept.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and really interesting that franchise developers, more focused on asking questions because, they know everything about their brand. They're very confident in the brand. The candidate, if they are interested in being a business owner, they'll go through the process and get those questions answered. So I think that's really interesting. So you hop on the introduction call. Let's say you have a successful introduction call. You say this candidate seems like something I want to work with. The candidate says this is a brand I'm pretty interested in. What would that next step in the process look like?
It business model webinar, and that webinar is somewhere in the 45 to 60-minute time frame. One of my brands has much more information, so they do that in a two-part, about 45 minutes or an hour each. But it's about a 45 or 60-minute business model webinar, and that of course is done by Zoom, because we just can't do any work without Zoom nowadays. But it's a visual, and it goes over all the types of things that we might have spoken about briefly on the intro call. So we talk about how and why the business works, how they will be trained, how they'll be onboarded, how they'll recruit their staff, how they'll acquire their customers, the financial investment that they'll face. and any and everything that really might give them enough information to again decide whether they want to learn more. And that webinar it's two-way, right? We're looking for people who are going to ask questions, and if people want to go down a rabbit hole, again, to a long point, yeah, I'll go down that rabbit hole. I would love it if their significant other or family member or potential partner could also be on that webinar. And then at the end of the webinar, I'll send them the slide deck so that they can go back through it, come up with any follow-up questions, or share it with family members or advisors who weren't able to be on that call.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. And as we are talking about the mindset of a candidate and really understanding it's a two-way process, and one of the biggest things in franchising is being able to follow the system. So if you're not doing your homework, you're not following the webinar, you're not asking good questions, that's going to trigger some red flags for someone like Ron in terms of actually wanting to award a franchise to someone. So I think that's a good point. Just ask good questions. Don't be afraid to ask bad questions. So people, they hop on the intro call, the webinar, then people start to look into the unit economics and the FDD. Can you walk someone through? I think a lot of people don't really even know what an FDD is, what it even stands for. There's 23 items. Can you kind of highlight what those big items are and really what the point of the FDD is? Because as we mentioned, a lot of people on that first call are like, how much am I investing? When am I getting this back? And, the FDD is really, if both sides are interested, you're going to get those questions answered, really.
And keep in mind that the way I coach my salespeople and the way I work with candidates might be different than other franchisors. Don't think that this is it's got to be this way kind of thing. But, on that intro webinar, I will talk about the unit economics where I can.
Okay.
So I know that every candidate has a couple of specific questions that they're interested in, right? They've got to know about every business. They want to know, how much will it cost me? How am I going to find my employees? How am I going to find my customers? How much am I going to make? Right. So I know I have to address those every call, every webinar, every space. So when we send out an FDD, we really try to have the candidate schedule the FDD review call before they've gotten the FDD. So, for example, on that webinar, if they've already sent me in my little questionnaire that gives me a little bit of information, financial and so forth about them, I'm going to send them the FDD right after that. But on that webinar call at the end, I'm going to try and schedule it. And what I say is, it usually takes people 3 to 5 days to go through the FDD and make notes. So let's look to schedule a call 5 or 7 days from now. Let's look at our calendars, what works for you. And I do that because when some people get an FDD, and if this were printed out, it would be a pretty thick magazine. They look at that and they go, oh my gosh, look at this. And some people think it's written in legalese. It's really not. It is so much easier to read for lay people than it was years ago before it was updated. But so I also, on the webinar and in the slide deck, I send out a little best practices on FDD to the candidate. And it says, here's the items that are most important. And items are like chapters. So here's the chapters that are most important, chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7. These are the ones about your initial investment and your ongoing costs, right? Everybody wants to know that. And I explained to people on that webinar call that when they look at the initial investment range, it starts here and it goes to here. And everybody wants to be down here. Then why could it be up here? And I'll explain to people in a very general sense what that range means. So, for example, if the brand is home-based and if you're using a vehicle, on the bottom end, you are not paying any rent or putting any furniture or whatever into an office. And you're leasing a vehicle, or you're even using a vehicle that you already have if it's appropriate. On the top end, you're renting a space and maybe furnishing it, and maybe you're buying a vehicle rather than leasing it or providing an existing. So that's just one of the other areas. And the other area I always want to point out, if you are going to go into a business in a semi-absentee or executive model where you're going to be hiring a manager, well, you're moving up that range because you're paying a manager for some of the tasks that normally the franchise owner would be able to do and keep that investment range low.
Mm.
And then I talk about the item 19. That item 19 is
Yeah.
called a financial performance representation. So that talks about, it actually states data, if available, on the actual performance of franchisees or of corporate units or whatever, depending on the brand. And I don't even bother telling people that just because it says this, you could make this much, doesn't mean you will, because that's stated very clearly in the disclosure document.
Yeah.
But it is a way that we can help you understand what other people are getting out of their performance. And I always let people know that after that FDD, where the candidate and I are going to have a conversation and I'll answer their basic questions, then they're going to actually speak with franchisees and they can ask those franchisees any question that they want, including financial information and would they want to do it again and what would they do differently, all those great things that are very valuable.
Mm. Yeah, it's really powerful as people are literally the step-by-step process is literally for your favor, if you are interested, so that all those questions that you have and those 100 questions that you aren't even thinking about, you'll start to think about those and they'll start to come up. So the process really is in place for your favor. So it sounds like at this point, both sides have kind of established interest with each other. They like the brand, you like them. They've looked at the unit economics. They feel comfortable with the financials and what that could potentially look like, if they start to follow the system and, follow the operational team and the marketing support. So what does that next step look like? And this may be one of the most powerful phases, in my opinion, just the validation phase. And there's kind of two parts to it. We've kind of talked about the first part, validation with the franchise developer, and, they're your support team, making sure you feel comfortable with them. But really, you're going to validate with other franchise owners. And I think a really valuable point, Ron, is that it's not just the top 10 franchise owners, it's, all the franchise owners in the system. So can you talk about what that validation looks like for someone and what that opportunity looks like and how they're really getting those tougher questions answered during this process?
Sure. I agree with you. I think this is the
Mm.
most important step in franchise research. I mean, every step is important. Holy cow, you can't skip any steps and expect to get a good result.
Yeah.
But when I talk to candidates about validation, first of all, I want to let the franchisees know that this person is a serious interested party
Mm.
and that they should indeed speak with that person. And I actually do at our annual franchisee conference, I do a presentation on best practices in building your brand, right? Because franchise owners are stakeholders in their brand,
Yeah.
and it behooves them to help us make sure that only the right franchise owners are brought in the future. Remember, a great franchise operator adds to the value of every franchisee's existing franchise business. And a poor operator, especially a rogue operator,
Yeah.
actually harms the value of everybody's franchise. So I do a mutual introduction to all franchisees, everyone in the system. I tell candidates that it is absolutely critical for them to speak to, and I don't want to say the good, the bad, and the ugly, but in reality, they want to speak to some of the top performers, they want to speak to some of the middle performers, and they want to speak to some of the poor performers. And I'll tell a candidate bluntly, if you talk to these top performers, these middle performers, and these poor performers, I want you to then think, which one do I have the most in common with which group?
Mm.
Because I have yet in 25 years to have a candidate come in and tell me, no, I'm fine being a bottom 25%, or, oh yeah, that's good for me. Everybody comes in and they think they're going to be a top performer. But if one of our brands is so sales centric. I
Mm.
mean, these people are incredibly aggressive and competitive. I don't mean that they do hard sales to their customers, but they are so fiercely competitive that if I were calling them for validation, I would be like,
Yeah.
that ain't me. That is not me. And I would not be confident in that business operation as that I was going to be a top performer. So if you're not going to be a top performer and you're not going to attain your goals based on what those, wherever you might range, then step out of it and don't research that brand anymore. It's just not right for you. But
Mm.
I want people to call people that are in markets like theirs, people who've been in for a short term, a middle range, and a long term. I think it's great that they call former franchisees,
Mm,
right? So they find out, why did you get out? How was that process? Did
yeah.
the franchisor help you attain the exit that you wanted? Oh my gosh, that's really important too.
Mm,
But I love, specific questions like, what did you learn? What would you do
yeah.
differently? Are you glad you did this? All those things are very, very valuable questions.
Yeah, and those are really good points. And I really like looking at people in the top, middle, and bottom percent, and especially in markets similar to yours. So you can really get that picture of what it took, ask those hard questions of, the ROI, the cash flow, hiring employees, how difficult things really are, and getting the different perspective from the franchisor and the franchisees, and making sure those pictures are aligned, I think is really important as well. So I think those are really important points. So they validate the opportunity. The last part is really kind of the discovery day. And with the discovery day, what does that look like? Should they still have questions unanswered at this point, or is this really more like a confirmation day? And yeah, kind of what does that look like?
Well, different franchisors do it different ways. Some of them Some of them, it's truly a discovery day, meaning they are still learning. And in many cases, we're learning about that person. I'm a big believer that in person, you are much more likely to get a true picture and a better understanding of each other. So
Yeah.
I love in-person discovery days. Some people do it as a confirmation day, meaning if I did my job as a developer, you've already learned everything you need to know to make your decision.
Yeah.
Now, are you comfortable with the people that we're putting in place to help you start and grow your business?
Mhm.
And some people call it a meet the team day. There's all sorts of cute little terms. And different franchises bring people in for that event early in the process because they want to get to know, in person and see if this is something they even want to continue with the education process. I would love to be able to do that, but
Yeah.
that's not normally available. I usually do it, again, as you said, after validation, pretty much as the final step in the research process. But they're going to come in general. They might come in if it's done in person, and we usually offer both. They're going to come in the night before. Hopefully they'll be able to go out to dinner with us and
Yeah.
whatever other candidates might be there. This is going to be very casual. We will answer business questions, but that's not the prime objective. The prime objective is to get to know each other as a person. And then the next morning, we'll go in and we'll have an opportunity to meet
Mhm.
the different people who are going to be involved, the onboarding or launch people, the trainers, the business coaches, the marketing coaches, hopefully the brand leader, all the people that are going to be integral in helping start and build that great business. And we're hopefully we're going to have another meal, maybe a lunch, maybe even go out on a job site or see what the operation is, maybe do a tour of the facility if it's got a training center or an operating unit right there, because all of those things are part of the education process. The more we can educate a candidate, the better decision everybody makes. We do not characteristically ask someone to sign a franchise agreement at the end of that day. There are some brands that do. I'm really not the biggest fan of that, but some brands do it, and they feel that when someone is at that discovery event, they are at the absolute top excitement level throughout any point in the process, and they would love to go ahead and get the franchise agreement taken care of then.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really powerful. And, our time's starting to wind up. Unfortunately, this has been really, really awesome. So we've kind of gone through the whole process, and I still have so many questions from the industry veteran. I could pick your brain apart for the next 24 hours. But, someone, they go through the process, or let's say someone is interested in franchising, they want to start going through the process. Obviously, we've gone through the whole process now, and that process is totally free. Like no one's going to pay anything, but their biggest investment is their time. Most people, they're working 9 to 5, they have a family. So it is a pretty big time commitment. If you're going to really explore and take things seriously. So how does someone know, should they go through the full process with a franchise to figure out, is this for me? Could they get on an introduction call and say, no, this isn't for me? Do they need to look at the unit economics? Is there like a certain stage where you say someone could drop out, or should they go through the whole process no matter what? What do you think a candidate should be thinking in terms of that?
Wow. Well, I can tell you that if someone goes through the intro call and they are not intrigued enough to learn more, then they should just step out. And sometimes that might be, unfortunately, it might be a personality conflict. As you say, I'm an extrovert, and I'll use that complimentary term and say I'm an extrovert, because I do say it differently when I describe myself. But sometimes I'm a little overpowering, and there are people who just are not going to be comfortable working with me. And if I learn that, then I'll offer to put them with one of my coworkers who's a little calmer, a little less over the top. Usually I won't ever know that. They'll just never call me back, or never schedule that webinar or whatever. But if they hear something that turns them off, they should just ask a question, to confirm that that's indeed the correct information. And if they're working with a franchise consultant, just reach back to the consultant and say, look, I got a concern here. This is the issue. How do you feel about that? Because sometimes it just might be misinformation or misunderstanding. And then, at every step, they should be able to say at the end of that step, is this something I want to learn more about? And if I've done my job, then they are going to know whether they should continue through the process or not. And when they get to unit economics, if, oh my God, only 4% of the people are making what I feel I need to make, I'm out. I'm not going to be able to attain my goals. This is not the right business opportunity. But again, people come in with a unicorn idea and they say, I want a passive opportunity. I want to invest 50,000. I want to make 200,000 my first year. Yeah. If that existed, Josh and I would have bought them all, and we wouldn't have one to offer you.
Yeah. I always say that, a lot of people, they come in, they think however much money, maybe 500,000, they think they can just throw that and, make $500,000 every year after that. And if that were the case, legitimately every person in the finance industry would have a franchise, they'd have a business, they'd be doing all these different things. But obviously with business ownership comes great responsibility and taking some risk, and franchising really hedges that risk to an extreme extent, and you get to go through this whole process to really see if it is for you. I do want to spend a couple minutes diving into threshold brands, but one question for you, I think that's really interesting. So, someone potentially interested in franchising, one thing that's important is strong validation, and they want to make sure that the franchise is still awarding more franchises. It could be a red flag if they haven't really awarded a franchise in the last 12 months, for example. So starting to wonder that, but you've worked at a bunch of different franchises and helped them grow tremendously, but they've all been very strong brands with very strong validation, and you've really grown them like hundreds of units, which is very impressive. And you're really leading the charge through the whole education process. So how does someone start to evaluate, the best opportunity for me, and starting to see, they validate the opportunity, but how are you able to grow a franchise, at a responsible rate, but still validating it and allowing those franchise owners to be able to scale their territory and grow? So, people, they're going through the process, how do they know they're working with a good franchise, for example, like yourself, someone that has, the veteran industry responsibilities, you've done it all before. What should they start to be looking for and starting to see, this franchise knows what they're doing?
Wow, you've asked about 19 questions in that. So
That's something I'm working on, Ron. My bad. I'm throwing a lot at you, and I
that's
know
okay.
time's winding down. But I guess to kind of ask it a little bit better. Um, so
I can jump in and try to answer as many of those as possible. That's not a problem. So
I guess the big thing is that you've been able to grow franchises, and a lot of big, the magic numbers, obviously kind of 100 units you hear a lot, and you've grown franchises past that rate, where that's kind of a point where you're like, that's a successful franchise, they validate well. You've been able to kind of grow a couple franchises to that point. What kind of, there's a lot of competition. What gives a candidate kind of that confidence that the franchisor, who's really their support system, knows what they're doing, if that makes better sense there?
sure. Well, there's a couple of really, really easy markers to see. And one of the things that you mentioned is consistent growth, right? So if you look in the item 20 in the FDD, it shows how many locations they've added over the last 3 years. It also shows how many locations they have closed or terminated or resold over the last 3 years. So what you're looking for is some consistency. It's okay to have an upward trend on sales. That's great. But if there are many closures and terminations, that's a big red flag. You got to find out about that. I also feel that any serious franchise candidate should look at my LinkedIn. If they're talking to me, if they're talking to one of my franchise developers, they should look at that person's LinkedIn and see, is this a person who's hopped from brand to brand to brand to brand every month and a half or every year and a half or every 8 months or whatever? Because that does not show consistency. That does not build trust. Another point, I guess, to mention is, are existing franchise owners expanding? Are they adding territories, or in a case like Threshold, are they adding brands perhaps?
Yeah.
That shows that they have confidence in the franchisor.
Mhm.
And if they're expanding, then it's got to be a good opportunity for business.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I love how you called me out for that. That's awesome. Something that I'm really working on. So next time I have you on, Ron, I won't do that. We'll be working on it.
No worries.
That was a really great response. I think that although I didn't phrase it the best, that was an awesome response. So I appreciate that. With literally just 2 minutes left, I wish we could have really dove into a lot more, but can you just dive into people? You know, you're the vice president of Threshold Brands, you know, really powerful home service company. Can you give kind of a high level overview of Threshold Brands and kind of what the high level opportunity is for a potential candidate?
Sure. Threshold Brands is a big family of home services brands. So all of our brands are residential service centric. A couple of them do some commercial, one of them does some government, but it's really all residential. And it's really all about being able to provide a great service and a great customer experience to your clients in your community, your neighbors and your friends and so forth, and being able to build a successful, profitable business. We try to pride ourselves on low investment, high level of support, and tremendous franchisee satisfaction. And that's, as you mentioned, that's validation. I build a relationship with the clients that I work with. The clients that I put into business 25 years ago in my first franchise I'm still in contact with them. As a matter of fact, the younger brother of one of them is now a support rep for one of our brands.
Oh, awesome.
But these, the benefit of a platform company like Threshold with we just added an 11th brand actually. One of the benefits is that we can provide tremendous amounts of support without requiring each franchisee to hold so much of the cost of that, right? Because it's spread out. We have about 700 franchisees now or locations. So it's all spread out. They can get many more services at a much better rate. But also, they can work with other franchisees in their market area of other brands. They can cross market. They can build referrals. But it's also a great support network. They can meet once a month and go to lunch and talk about small business aspects and what's good and what's bad and how they can work through these things. The franchisee network is a huge value in a good franchise brand. Oh my gosh, please make sure that people understand the value of that franchisee network.
That's awesome, Ron. Well, I know our hour's wrapped up. I think you did a great job summing up Threshold Brands, and I appreciate you really giving a potential candidate, someone interested in business ownership, really that full rundown, given, every franchise, every system does things a little bit differently. But overall, those are really the high level points, and really things to look for if you are potentially interested in taking those next steps. I think, a couple notes that I really had, and one of the recent points was social media. I think, pay attention to the franchise developer, the CEO, the founder. Look at them on podcasts like this, where they actually open up, they give their thoughts. You can really see who they are as a person. Is that someone I would have a beer with, for example? Is that someone, I'd play basketball with, for example? And, well, excuse me, I guess I've been talking too much. But are they going from brand to brand every 6 to 12 months, where it's really just, I found that next opportunity? Or are they really growing, developing a business? Are they at the conventions? There's tons of franchising conventions. Are they surrounding themselves with other industry veterans? So I think that's really, really important. Whoa, excuse me. And then also what you mentioned, I have been talking too much. Ron, I got to hand it back over to you. But I think what you mentioned at the start with introspection, looking inside yourself, A lot of people are looking externally for all these different opportunities. And like you said, looking for the unicorn and all these different things to line up. But you got to ask yourself, with every business and every job, there's pros and cons. But think about internally, what would business ownership do for you in the next 3 to 5 years versus your current position and what that would do for you in 3 to 5 years. And then the transparency aspect, I think, is really important between a franchisee and a franchisor and a broker and a candidate. There's just you need to be transparent. These franchisors, as we've talked about through the process, they're looking to award territories. The last thing they want is to award territory to someone that doesn't want to grow a business. So they want to really get to know you. So you want to get to know them as well. You don't want to come in with, I have $200,000. What can you do for me? That's not how it works. It really is a two-way street, because these are your support system and the people you're going to be spending, a lot of time with over the next couple of years. So you want to make sure the culture aligns as well as the financials. So Ron, I greatly appreciate the full hour of your time and even running a little bit overboard. I'm excited to continue the relationship. If anyone's interested in Threshold Brands, Ron is definitely the guy to talk to, and he knows everything about the industry and he's happy to talk to you. So Ron, I greatly appreciate you on episode 15. I'd definitely love to have you back. This was awesome.
Thank you very much, Josh. As I say, I love doing this, and I'm thrilled to work with you. And anytime you want me on another episode, you just reach out, and I am gonna do it.
Awesome, Ron. I appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone.
All right, have a great day, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Also, like, comment, subscribe, help out the algorithm. If you found this helpful, share it with other people. All things franchising mindset. Let's conquer the mind. Let's conquer today, and let's have a great holiday season, everyone.